Somewhere in the plumbing aisle of a Home Depot in central Ohio, on a Tuesday afternoon in the late summer of 2022, a man in his mid-50s stands holding an $8 bottle of drain cleaner in one hand and his phone in the other. The phone has just chimed. The screen shows an email from his accountant. The subject line reads, Q3 Summary. He glances at the total net worth line at the bottom of the message, which reads $650 million. He puts the phone in his back pocket. He continues to try to remember which specific type of pipe joint sits under the utility sink in the back room of one of the laundromats he owns in Youngstown, because he wants to fix it himself over the weekend. That's the scene I want you to hold in your head for the next 24 minutes. Nobody at the Home Depot knows. The forklift beeping in the aisle behind him doesn't know. The cashier ringing him up 10 minutes later doesn't know. The barista who has been making his medium drip coffee at the same shop for 8 years doesn't know. His college friends don't know. His neighbors don't know. Most of his own family doesn't know. The exact dollar amount above, the $650, is known in full to 2 other people on the planet. His accountant, who is female in her late 40s with a small firm in the next town over, and his wife of 31 years. That's the story. I want to walk through how he got there, why the structure of his portfolio looks the way it does, why he lives the way he does, and, this is the harder part, what specifically it costs him to stay invisible. This isn't a video about aspiration. It's a video about a specific person, whose name I've been asked not to use, whom I've known through mutual professional acquaintance for the last decade or so, and whose life at ground level is the strangest and most instructive example of stealth wealth I've been close enough to observe directly. He didn't inherit. He didn't sell a startup. He didn't ride a stock option grant. He didn't, at any point, work in finance. The start of the chain was, as far as I can piece it together from the 2 long conversations he's actually walked me through, a specific afternoon in the late spring of 2011, when he was 37 years old and sitting on a bench in a break room of a regional hospital in Ohio, where his younger brother was recovering from a routine surgery. He had been in the break room for about 40 minutes, waiting. 2 vending machines against the wall were both broken. One had a stuck coil that would take money and not release the snack. The other had a chip bag jammed diagonally against the glass. He tried both. They ate his money. Instead of walking out, he sat down and did a specific piece of mental arithmetic. He had noticed in the 40 minutes of watching foot traffic that 7 people had tried the machines and given up. If the machines were working properly, they would each have generated about $10 in receipts over that window. Extrapolated across a 12-hour hospital shift, that's roughly $140 a day. Extrapolated across a month, that's around $4,200 in gross, at maybe 40% margin after cost of goods and service, meaning roughly $1,700 a month per machine at a well-trafficked location that was, at that moment, generating literally 0. He walked out of the hospital and drove home. That night he opened a laptop and read for about 4 hours about the vending industry. Location contracts, wholesale snack sourcing, route servicing schedules, depreciation schedules for used machines, handshake versus written commission agreements with property owners. 2 weeks later, he bought a used vending machine, a single-slot combo unit refurbished for $900 from a small operator who was retiring. He placed it, on a handshake agreement, in the lobby of a local dental practice whose owner he had grown up with. He stocked it himself, drove there twice a week to restock and empty the coin box, and at the end of the first month, he cleared $190 in profit. $190 is a nothing number. It's nothing compared to what his brother-in-law was making that year. It's nothing compared to the salary at the paper factory where he was, at that point, still working the second shift as a supervisor. It's nothing compared to anything you could brag about at a dinner party. But it wasn't a nothing number to him. It was a mechanism proof. The mechanism had run in his laptop spreadsheet, and then it had run in the real world, and the two numbers had matched to within about $12. That was the first thing that mattered. Look at the math on that. By month 4, he had 6 machines. By month 12, he had 18. By the end of year 2, he had sold most of the machines to a regional operator for $120,000, kept the 2 most productive ones, and used the sale proceeds to buy his first laundromat. Not a franchise, not a new build. A 28-year-old laundromat in a blue-collar neighborhood in Ohio from an owner who had run it since 1983 and was retiring. 12 washers, 8 dryers, coin-operated only, no cards, no app. He paid $71,000 for the operation and the equipment, and the location's 10-year lease, with an option to buy the underlying property for a fixed price at year 5. The first laundromat did about $84,000 a year in gross revenue, of which roughly $41,000 was net after utilities, supplies, and the lease. Not glamorous, but laundromats have one specific attribute that made them, in his framing, the right next asset. Everyone needs to wash clothes. In good economies and in bad economies, in booms and in recessions, in inflation and in deflation. Clothes wash. It's a permanent need. It's a permanent cash flow. Over the next 4 years, he bought 6 more laundromats, all in the same 15-mile radius, all in similar working-class neighborhoods, all with old but reliable coin-op equipment, all bought from retiring owners at what a private equity valuation guide would consider modestly favorable multiples. He was building what Nassim Taleb, in his 2012 book Anti-Fragile, describes as a barbell portfolio at the bottom rung. Assets that gain from disorder because the underlying human need doesn't depend on prosperity. Taleb doesn't specifically write about laundromats, but the principle he articulates about robustness in cash flow assets is exactly what the man had figured out from the original vending machine spreadsheet. Then, it was parking lots. Municipal parking lots at boring morning government auctions. Nobody attends those auctions. There is almost no competition. He bought his first for $160,000, a 50-space lot behind a courthouse in a small county seat. Then 2 more over the next 3 years for slightly more each. Then billboard land. Not the billboards themselves, the land underneath. Long-term ground leases to outdoor advertising companies who pay year-over-year escalating rent for the physical dirt and airspace. He owns 9 of these now, along a specific stretch of highway that runs through 3 counties. Then a commercial cleaning company. Revenue? About $1.3 million a year. Contracts with public schools and outpatient medical clinics. Old, unglamorous, dependable. He bought it from the 68-year-old founder for 3 years of earnings, a boring multiple, which is the only kind he pays. His accountant, the same woman with the small firm in the next town over, told me at a professional gathering while he was in the men's room that his portfolio is the most intentionally boring portfolio she has ever seen in her career. She said this as a compliment. He built it that way on purpose. Robert Frank, in his 2007 book Richistan, cataloged the different tiers and postures of American wealth, from the show-off tier through the merely comfortable tier through what he called the invisible tier. The man I'm describing is a canonical member of the invisible tier. Frank's category still holds up 16 years later. If anything, it holds up more strongly now than it did when the book came out. Because the noise-to-signal ratio on visible wealth has grown so much that invisibility itself has become the sharper distinguishing marker. The car is a 2011 Toyota 4Runner with a cracked rear bumper he has not fixed for 6 years, and roughly 98,000 miles on the clock. He drives it every day. He has driven no other car since he bought it used in 2013 for $22,000. The wardrobe is roughly 6 pairs of Dickies work pants, roughly 12 fleece pullovers from a national sporting goods chain, the ones that go on sale in late January for $29, and a rotation of 6 or 7 flannel shirts from the same source. He has one suit for weddings and funerals. He wears it maybe once every 2 years. The house is a 1982 ranch in a suburban neighborhood 12 miles outside a mid-sized Ohio city. 2,200 square feet, 4 bedrooms, 3 of which have been converted to a home office, a workshop, and a guest room that no guest has stayed in for 4 years. Paid off in 2017. The neighbors are a retired school teacher, a nurse manager, a plumber, and a family that runs a small local business supplying uniforms to auto body shops. He knows all their first names and roughly half their kids' first names. Nobody in the neighborhood knows what he actually does for a living. When asked, he says he manages some small properties. That posture, the car, the clothes, the house, the vague answer, is not frugality. It is a specific piece of engineering. It is a piece of armor. And what the armor blocks is important enough to be worth walking through. If people know you have serious money, 3 things happen predictably. First, a long list of people you have not spoken to in years surface with requests. Loan requests, investment pitches, small charitable asks that don't feel small when you're the source. Second, your relationships with the people who already knew you change, subtly at first, and then structurally, as the balance of who is paying for what starts to reset around your presumed capacity. Third, you become a target for salespeople who now know you can afford the more expensive version of everything, for lawyers who track high net worth divorces, for advisors and agents and hangers-on. All 3 happen slowly and irreversibly, and none of them are undoable once they start. The armor prevents all of it. Not because he's ashamed of the money, because he doesn't want to spend the rest of his life managing the second-order effects of visibility. At networking events, which he attends occasionally, mostly to check on a specific relationship, he stands in the fleece and the flannel, and nobody looks at him. The men in the fitted merino sweaters and the leased German cars underestimate him. He listens more than he talks. He remembers everything. He walks out, having learned something. Nobody in the room has any idea what his balance sheet looks like, and that, specifically, is the point. The men in the fitted merino sweaters walk out having learned nothing about him, and one of them may, in about 18 months, attempt to sell him a real estate deal without realizing he owns 14 buildings. That is the armor doing its job. I want to step outside the specific case for a second because I've now watched 3 separate people in the same rough weight class run some version of this posture. And the specific things that break the armor when it breaks are worth naming for you directly. The armor cracks in exactly 2 ways in my observation. First, a family member, usually a sibling, occasionally an adult child, figures out the actual balance sheet, and the family dynamics reshape irreversibly around the discovery. Second, a public event forces disclosure, a legal proceeding, a philanthropic contribution too large to hide, an obituary that names asset values. In both cases, the specific problem is not that the money becomes known. The problem is that once known, it can never become unknown again. There's no version of the person's future life in which the pre-disclosure privacy comes back. Which is why the men and women I've watched sustain the invisible posture for decades tend to be almost paranoid about the arithmetic of who knows what. They think in terms of information radius. Everyone inside the radius knows. Nobody outside it does. The radius is small on purpose. Brief stop. If this piece has been landing, the specific case, the arithmetic, the armor, the way it's been laid out is what NetSum tries to do differently. Not the aspirational display, the mechanism underneath. If that's the tone you came for, subscribing here is the marker. That's the direction. The rest continues. Here's the part that cost the most. About 4 years ago, one of his closest friends from college, a man he has been in continuous contact with for 30-plus years, best man at his wedding, godfather to one of his children, sat down with him at his kitchen table one Saturday morning and asked to borrow $85,000 to expand his food truck operation into a second and third truck. The food truck was doing well. The friend was proud of it. He had built it from nothing over 4 years. The expansion, from his perspective, was the natural next step. Buy 2 more trucks, hire 2 more crews, cover 3 lunch corridors in the city instead of 1. $85,000 is, to the man I'm describing, 11 days of passive income. He could have written the check without noticing it in any meaningful sense. He could have handed it to his friend that morning with a handshake and said, "We'll figure out the terms later," and nothing about his balance sheet would have moved. He did not write the check. What he did instead was ask his friend to walk him through the specific arithmetic of the expansion. What are the leases on the 2 new trucks? What is the current commissary agreement? What is the projected revenue per truck at each site? What is the actual cost of the additional insurance? What is the payroll cost of the 2 new crews, before tips and after tips? What are the fuel costs at the specific routes? What are the health code inspection risks at each location? The friend didn't have most of these numbers cleanly. He had a general sense. He knew the trucks would cost about $35,000 each, used. He knew the leases were monthly. He didn't know the specific lease terms with any precision. He didn't know the health code exposure. He hadn't priced the insurance for the second and third trucks specifically. The man told his friend, gently and directly, that if he wrote the check that Saturday, he was 90% sure the friend would lose the $85,000 plus another $40,000 within 18 months, because the expansion arithmetic hadn't been done. He said this not as a lecture. He said it as a specific prediction based on what he had learned from watching 4 other small business acquisitions go badly. Then he asked if his friend wanted him to help. Not with the money, with the arithmetic. For the next 4 Saturdays, they sat at the same kitchen table. They went through every line item. They renegotiated the current commissary agreement. The friend had been overpaying by roughly $600 a month. They identified a hidden loss in the current single truck operation. The friend was undercounting cash tip crew costs by about $1,200 a month, which meant the current truck was less profitable than the friend thought. They rebuilt the expansion projection with real numbers, at which point it became clear that a 2-truck expansion at the current cash position would fail. But a 1-truck expansion at a reduced cost lease would be borderline sustainable. By the 5th Saturday, the friend had, with some help finding the right person at the SBA, secured a small business administration loan and a state-level micro grant that together funded a single-second truck at exactly the terms the arithmetic supported. The friend did not know that his best friend of 30 years could have written the entire check without noticing. He did not know that the 4 Saturdays of arithmetic were, in a way that would have been almost impossible to explain to him, a much larger gift than the $85,000. I want to name what happened there because it is easy to miss. If the check had been written, the friend's expansion would have failed. The friendship would have ended. The $85,000 would have been a permanent gift, which the friend would have felt as a permanent debt. The relationship would not have survived it. This is not speculation. This is the pattern in the small business failure literature and the interpersonal financial arithmetic literature and the family loan literature. Written large checks between close friends have a specific and terrible statistical failure rate. By not writing the check and by spending the 4 Saturdays instead, the friend has now built a 2-truck operation that is his, profitable, sustainable, self-earned. The friendship is unchanged. The friend's pride is intact. The wealth is still invisible. The armor still holds. That is the specific and continuous cost of the invisible tier. You cannot save the people close to you with money, even when you have money. You have to save them with arithmetic. And you have to do it in a way that lets them keep their pride. The armor comes with a specific psychological cost, and I want to name it clearly because it doesn't come up often in stealth wealth articles. The specific loneliness of the invisible tier is this. There are, in his life, exactly 2 people to whom he can speak candidly about his actual financial situation. His accountant, professionally, and his wife, personally. To everyone else, he presents as a moderately successful small business operator. This means every conversation about his life is filtered through a partial fiction. He does not tell his brother the truth. He does not tell his oldest college friends the truth. He does not tell his kids the whole truth, though the older 2 have begun to figure out fragments. He carries at all times the specific psychological weight of maintaining the mismatch between what people think of him and what is actually true. The mismatch is not dishonest. He does not say anything false. He just doesn't correct assumptions. But the accumulated weight of 30 years of not correcting assumptions is not trivial. He describes it, in the small windows where he talks about it at all, as a kind of chronic quiet. He would say, and this is roughly a paraphrase of the 2 or 3 times I've heard him address it, that he'd rather have the chronic quiet than the loud alternative. He has watched enough people move into the visible tier to know what it costs. He has chosen the quiet. But he is not naive about what it costs him. I want to try to name what the underlying mechanism is, because it's the part that generalizes even for people who won't get anywhere near $650 million. The mechanism is this. Boring cash flow assets held for long periods without visible consumption at any point along the way compound at rates that display-oriented careers cannot match. It's not that people in display-oriented careers make less money. Many of them make substantially more per year in earned income than the man I'm describing has ever made. What's different is the spread. 2 variables define the spread. First, the compound rate on cash flow from an asset that continues to run without depending on your active labor. Second, the fraction of income that stays in the compounding column rather than moving into consumption. Someone with $200,000 a year in earned income and $180,000 a year lifestyle has, in effect, $20,000 a year to compound. Someone with the same $200,000 and a $60,000 a year lifestyle has $140,000. Over 40 years, Those two profiles produce net worth outcomes that differ by more than an order of magnitude. Now, change the earned income number. Someone with $60,000 a year in earned income who spends $50,000 has $10,000 to compound. Slower, but the compound still runs. Their profile at year 40 is well behind the $200,000 earner with $60,000 a year lifestyle. But it is well ahead of the $200,000 earner with a $180,000 a year lifestyle. That's the whole mechanism. The spread, not the salary, is what shows up on the balance sheet at year 40. I want to sit with something specific here that I think matters for anyone watching this who isn't going to end up in the 650 million tier. Because most people watching aren't. Most people watching are going to end up somewhere between 100,000 and a couple million in accumulated net worth over a working lifetime. The instinct on watching a video like this is to think that the specific numbers don't apply to you, and to write the whole thing off as aspirational content about a life you're never going to have. That's the wrong frame. The specific numbers don't apply. The specific mechanism does. If you take the ratio of what you compound to what you spend and hold that ratio for 30+ years, the shape of your outcome is entirely determined by that ratio, not by whether the absolute number ever crossed a specific threshold. The man in the plumbing aisle is one extreme of that ratio. But everyone reading this or watching this has some version of it running in their own life right now, whether they've measured it or not. Ask yourself, honestly, what your ratio looks like this year. That's the actionable version of this video. The man I'm describing is a specific extreme of this pattern. He picked cash flow businesses over stocks specifically because cash flow businesses do not require you to sell an asset to eat. The vending machine, the laundromat, the parking lot, the billboard land, the cleaning company. Each of these runs, produces monthly cash, and the cash gets deposited into a boring institutional account. He has, in 29 years of holding these assets, sold approximately zero. He does not need to. The cash flow feeds itself. Robert Frank, back to his catalog of the invisible tier, the specific pattern he documents is not glamorous. It's not a story that makes anyone want to change their life. Nobody watches a video about vending machines and laundromats and thinks, I want that. That is, in itself, part of the armor. Back to the Home Depot, the plumbing aisle, the $8 drain cleaner, the chime. The phone in one hand, the drain cleaner in the other, the forklift beeping behind him. The fluorescent lights humming, the email from the accountant. 650 million. He does not react. There is no ceremony. There is no restaurant, no champagne, no announcement, no phone call to make. He puts the phone in his back pocket. He continues to try to remember which pipe joint is under the utility sink in the back room of the Youngstown laundromat. He pays for the drain cleaner. He drives home in the 4Runner with the cracked bumper. He eats dinner with his wife. He does not tell her the number changed by $12 million that quarter, because it doesn't matter to their day. The next morning, he drives to the Youngstown laundromat and fixes the pipe himself. It takes 40 minutes. Nobody in the laundromat knows who he is. A woman folds towels near the window. A man reads a newspaper by the door. The dryers hum. He finishes the pipe. He drives home. He is 54 years old. He owns $650 million of the world. He has just fixed a pipe himself. That is the whole story. The number changed nothing. The number was never going to change anything. The mechanism that produced the number is the same mechanism that produced the first $190 from the first vending machine in the dental practice lobby 11 years earlier. The man on the bench in the hospital break room and the man in the Home Depot plumbing aisle are, in every observable sense, the same man. The number scaled. The man did not. That's the whole point. The armor is the mechanism. The mechanism is the armor. They are two names for the same posture. The posture of continuing to fix your own pipes when the balance sheet says you don't have to. I want to leave you with one specific piece of the case that I hope stays with you longer than the 650 number does. When I first started paying attention to how he actually lived, the Forerunner, the fleece, the paid-off ranch, I made the mistake most people would make in the same position. I assumed the visible modesty was compensating for something. Some earlier displacement, some class anxiety, some specific insecurity being managed through the choice not to spend. Over the years of watching, I have come to understand that I had the direction of causation backward. The modesty was not compensating for anything. The modesty was the point. The specific pleasure of fixing his own pipes on a Saturday morning at 54 years old while owning 940 commercial parking spaces and 11 laundromats and 9 billboard land plots and a cleaning company doing $1.3 million a year in revenue is a pleasure that only exists because he never learned to want the alternative. If you asked him whether he wanted a nicer car, he would look at you as if you had asked whether he wanted a nicer toothbrush. Fine, sure, but why? The car works, the toothbrush works, the pipe works when he fixes it. That is the whole life, and whatever specific version of it lives in you, whatever specific piece of your own life is quiet in exactly that way, is where the mechanism is actually already running. If any of this landed, if it named a mechanism you had been running without a name for, or if it put a name on the specific tier you had been quietly noticing exists, hit the like button. Subscribe to Net Sum if you want the count to keep showing up. And drop in the comments the specific small piece of it that hit hardest. I read them. The count keeps counting. Quietly.